How are we doing, everybody? Schuyler Callihan here. Another episode of Between the Ears. It is the morning after. We do this every week, kind of putting our final thoughts. At least, no, I shouldn't say final thoughts. We do that kind of on Tuesday on our next episode. But this is more of an episode where we just kind of take a deep breath, we think about it for a little bit, and then kind of come back to this. Usually, we'll have Chris on here, but due to scheduling stuff, we had to just roll solo today. So, West Virginia 49, UAlbany 14. Wasn't pretty. Score may show that differently, but if you watched the game, you knew that it was not the most impressive performance by any means by the defense. Offensively, uh, pretty much did what you wanted. Outside of the Jaheim White fumble, he had the big run, had the ball stripped out of his hands, a couple of other kind of bad plays, but outside of that, the offense did what they were supposed to do. They moved the ball at will. They were able to run the ball when they wanted to. They were able to throw the ball when they wanted to. They made plays in the passing game. Not as many drops this week as they had a week ago against Penn State, where seemingly everybody that played in the game at receiver or tight end had a drop. So seeing that get cleaned up, albeit against Albany, is a positive sign. Defensively, however, um, there's some issues there, but I'm hesitant to start sounding the alarm just yet. And I know it sounds crazy when you give up over 300 yards passing to an FCS team, but I feel like this secondary is going to get better as the season moves along. There was some really good stuff that they put on tape against Penn State last week. The numbers may not show that, but if you go back and you look at the deep touchdown or the touchdown at the end of the first half against Penn State, I mean, Hollis covered that play very, very well. Still don't even know if it ended up actually being a touchdown. If you go back and watch it, looks like he kind of juggled it along the side or along the out of bounds line before hitting the ground. Don't know if he actually got in or not. They called a touchdown. There was also another play towards the sideline, towards about the 50-yard line, where Aller just threaded the needle, put it in a really good spot. Just a really good play by Aller. Hollis, terrific coverage. Last night, Hollis was just downright bad. There's no other way to put it. I'm not going to be shy about, necessarily calling guys out, but I mean, he just didn't play well. That's the truth of it. And there's better football in there in that kid. We've seen it over his career at Northwestern. We saw it at times last week against Penn State. So I'm not ready to sound the alarm on him either because history shows us he's going to be a good corner. He's not going to be a liability. That's what the data shows. Last night was not a night for him or for anybody in that secondary. The other part of it is the pass rush or lack thereof. There wasn't hardly any of that. They had 2 sacks, but against a team like this, there just wasn't enough pressure generated to allow the secondary to be able to do their end of the deal. I mean, the secondary can only hold on to their coverage for so long before things just kind of turn into helter skelter, and before you know it, Miles Burkett's making a play. So there were several plays last night. I don't know how many, exactly, but I'd have to go back and watch. But I can count at least a handful where the corners, the safeties, the linebackers, they did their job in coverage, but because they were having to hold on to that coverage for so long, plays ended up happening. That cannot happen. The defensive line has to get more push up front. They have to get more pressure in the pocket. They need to collapse the pocket, flush the quarterback out, and make him throw, different types of throws off schedule. Didn't happen last night. Burkett just hung around, and if there wasn't a play right away, he just chucked it deep downfield, and their guys made the plays. West Virginia's did. They have to play the ball better in the air. Neil Brown talked about that last night in his post-game press conference. It's no secret, but I think that this defense is going to be better than what they've shown, not just this week, but in the first 2 weeks combined. I don't think it's a top 5 unit in the Big 12. At least they haven't shown that yet, but it's also not going to be the worst defense in the league. They're are a lot of reasons to, I wouldn't say be excited about this defense. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but there are reasons to feel okay about them moving forward. We haven't seen it necessarily on the field yet. So I understand the criticism. I understand the frustration towards Jordan Leslie and this defense, but it's not the worst I've seen. There have been teams like or games like this all throughout college in these first 2 weeks, or FBS teams and FCS game in those FCS games don't look sharp. And there's been games where they've lost. There's games where it was much closer than 49-14. So just be thankful that you were able to pull away eventually. You only gave up 14 points. I think the problem was just how you got to that 49-14 score. You would have liked to got the starters out much earlier in the game to give Nico Marchiol and that second string, 30 or 35 some odd reps on offense, but you just weren't able to do that because of how the game went. So here's what I'll say. If you look at this game and you look at how Penn State played Bowling Green, and you just look at those two alone and say, oh, West Virginia's in trouble. I'm sorry. Relax. Penn State, if you're looking at that game and think that West Virginia's in trouble, just think of it like this. You go and play a big game on the road, a massive week one game. You could argue, and I don't even think it's an argument, that that was a much, much bigger game for Penn State last week than it was for West Virginia. Why? Well, because Penn State doesn't have a whole lot of wiggle room. If they lose that game last week to West Virginia, they pretty much have to run the table or damn near close to it to get to the college football playoff without a Big Ten championship. So if they don't win the Big Ten, I don't know that they get in with a loss to West Virginia because obviously that would mean they'd probably have a second, maybe even a third loss. Even in the Big Ten, that makes it tough sledding. West Virginia, however, was never expected to win this game against Penn State, or that game against Penn State. You go and take care of business these next two games. They've already done one half of that. You can lose two games in the Big 12 and win the league, and you're in. You could lose two games all year in the Big 12, or go 10-2 on the schedule, that is, and still make the college football playoff, depending on how your wins set up. That game was much bigger for Penn State than it was West Virginia in so many different ways. You take care of that game in week one. You come back home, you play Bowling Green. You think it's just going to be a walk in the park. It was a complete flat spot for the Nittany Lions. Don't look at that game and say, oh my gosh, West Virginia is in such trouble if Bowling Green hung around with Penn State. Those types of games happen all the time. Worry about yourself. Don't look at, you can't compare apples and oranges. You can't say, oh, West Virginia looked bad against Penn State, and now that Bowling Green looked good against Penn State, that means West Virginia's bad. No, not it at all. Doesn't look good, but it's not a reason to be concerned. The reason to be concerned is that you gave up over 300 yards passing to an FCS quarterback, that you had 2 sacks on an FCS offense. That's what you need to be concerned about. So while I'm not ready to sound the alarm on Jordan Leslie or on this defense, fans have every right to be concerned, frightened, scared, frustrated, whatever you want to throw in there about this defense heading into the Backyard Brawl. This is a game West Virginia has to win, for outside of the obvious reason of it being your biggest rival. You lose this game, you're 1-2, and you enter Big 12 play in what is an absolute gauntlet to start. 5 games that are very, very challenging. Kansas, Iowa State, Kansas State, Arizona, Oklahoma State's in there as well. I mean, there is very little wiggle room. You have to win this game. And I hate to admit it, But Pitt has found a quarterback. Eli Holstein is no joke. He was a highly recruited kid out of high school. He transfers into Pitt and completely changes their offense. Now, they're not a team that's going to necessarily light up the scoreboard, but when you compare it to what they had a year ago, it's much, much better than what it was. So I don't know what the answer is going to be. Obviously, losing Eddie Vesterinen, that's a big loss. Neil said it in his presser last night that he's going to be out for what looks to be at least a few weeks with a leg injury. You're going to have to find some answers up front. Sean Martin has got to get to the quarterback. Asani Redwood has got to push the pocket. TJ Jackson, he's been the bright spot up front in the first 2 weeks. He needs to continue to do what he's been doing and build off of that. Linebackers have been great. If they can generate pressure next week, again, that's going to be the number one thing for this defense. If they can generate pressure on Eli Holstein, I think West Virginia's secondary will come to play. They'll be much better than what they were today or yesterday. And they may not give up 300 yards. I think Albany kind of thought at the beginning of this game that for them to have a shot, they're going to have to shrink this game. They're going to have to run the ball. They're going to have to play clock control, keep it out of West Virginia's hands. And that's kind of how the game started out. Then they realized, oh, yeah, we can't do this because we need more possessions. And the more we air it out, the more success we're having. So let's try and transition into this style of game. And when you only run the ball 35 times, I mean, they kind of figured out early on they weren't going to be able to run it very successfully. They started to air it out. They started to have some success. And when you become a team that can take shots downfield and complete them, all of a sudden you're posing some issues on West Virginia's defense. So I don't know what to make of it. You can be mad, you can be upset, or you can just take it for what it is, and that's kind of what I am. They didn't play well. It's not time to panic, but it's not time to be jumping for joy either. They need a lot figured out in the next 5 to 6 days. That's the reality of it. If they go and play like they did this week, next week in Pittsburgh, we're not going to have a very fun conversation come this time next Sunday. That's the reality of it. But if they show up and play more so to what they did in week one, outside of those handful of explosive plays, I think things are going to be okay. But again, don't start diving into the rabbit hole of, oh, Bowling Green played like this against Penn State. This team played like this. Just take a deep breath and relax. Focus on what happened in the UAlbany game. And I know it's from the fan perspective, but I mean, this is from the team side of it too. If you're a player on this team, you can't be worried about what happened against or what Penn State did against Bowling Green. And I know that they're not. So I don't know. I'm honestly kind of at a loss for words because I don't really know how to explain this one because I'm really not on either side of everything's going to be okay or everything's on fire and everyone's running around like they don't have answers. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. What you think about this one, your thoughts moving forward. Is there a reason to be concerned? Do you think everything's going to be all right? Let me know. I want to hear your thoughts. We'll interact with you in the comment section. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on our YouTube page at West Virginia on SI. Follow us on X at SI_WVU. And be sure to check back in with us on Tuesday as we kick off Backyard Brawl week. And while you're at it, if you've got a question, hit up my mailbag on Twitter. You can find me at Callihan_. I have a tweet there. I'll pin it to the top of my page where you can drop your question for this week's mailbags. Thank you guys for watching. For another week of Mountaineer coverage, we'll be back here on Tuesday. Take care.